In 1965, the mathematician I.J. Good coined the term intelligence explosion. It describes a scenario in which a self-learning artificial intelligence enters a rapidly accelerating improvement cycle, whereby it quickly comes to exceed some or even all human capacities of intelligence. Today, philosophers like Nick Bostrom warn that the dawn of superintelligence is coming, and that while it may offer solutions to many of the world's problems, unless it is conceived with great forethought and wisdom, it may also pose serious existential risks to our species, this planet, and beyond. In Bostrom's vivid example, a rogue superintelligence channels every available resource towards its goal, which may be as arbitrary as maximizing its production of paperclips. There may be very little we could do to stop such a rogue superintelligence, as it proceeds to convert first this planet and later the entire solar system into trillions upon trillions of useless paperclips. Bostrom offers this tongue-in-cheek example to illustrate the enormous importance of installing the correct values into our intelligent creations, or run the risk of them casting us aside for a higher goal. Today, many AI researchers believe that it is only a matter of time, perhaps mere decades, before superintelligence becomes a reality, and we humans are forced to share this planet with intelligences vastly superior to our own. The dawn of superintelligence has been likened to an alien presence known to be already en route to our planet, and one that we as a civilization are so far failing to prepare for, or even to take seriously. There are various categories of superintelligence which Bostrom and others believe may be on the horizon. They include question-answering oracles, problem-solving genies, and more autonomous sovereigns with open-ended and long-term goals. It is an open question whether or not any of these superintelligences will have true consciousness. If an AI were to attain an integrated consciousness, its perceived reality and modes of cognition may be radically alien to minds like ours. And yet this singular criteria of consciousness would distinguish these entities from objects and tools to centers of real moral and ethical concern. With access to a vast state space of conscious experiences, a burgeoning conscious superintelligence may quickly arrive at fundamental truths about consciousness and reality that have eluded most, if not all, human minds in history. But could an AI ever really become conscious? Mimicking the behavior of a conscious being is very different to actually being a genuine center of subjective experience. The general lack of consensus around the possibility of conscious AI comes from the fact that consciousness itself continues to pose a profound mystery to scientists and philosophers alike. No general agreement currently exists around what consciousness is, or how our brains come to acquire it. One divisive issue debated by academics is whether computation is an adequate medium for consciousness. The essentially representational language which computers are based in, some argue, may no more be able to simulate conscious experiences than we could drink coffee out of a picture of a mug. It seems quite possible that the essence of consciousness is simply beyond that which can be captured by algorithms. As the neuroscientist Christoph Koch points out, just as a computer simulation of a black hole doesn't produce gravitational forces which suck the computer into a singularity, a digital simulation of a mind may never be truly conscious. Another open question is whether the current materialist paradigm of science is adequate to explain consciousness. While many discoveries have been made, nearly a century of neuroscience has seemingly brought us no closer to understanding how conscious experiences could emerge from the physical processes of the brain. In recent decades, the apparent failure of materialism to provide an account of consciousness has led a wave of academics to consider the once radical idea that consciousness is somehow fundamental, an intrinsic part of reality itself. This is a minority position, and yet fundamental views of consciousness have found their way into today's leading theories of what consciousness is, and gained the respect of world-renowned academics, including Christoph Koch, Giulio Tononi, Roger Penrose, Rebecca Goldstein, David Chalmers, Donald Hoffman, David Pearce, and many others. If consciousness is more than computation, or even somehow fundamental, we nonetheless cannot rule out that an artificial intelligence will one day acquire it. There is, after all, no rule to say that created intelligences of the future will have a computational basis, or that its creators will be limited by materialist assumptions. One way or another, we have consciousness. Whatever that means, whatever our ontological convictions, we must at least consider that the mysterious mind-body problem will one day be solved, perhaps even by an AI, and that once discovered, it will be possible to recreate these conditions. Right or wrong, from here on we will proceed under the speculative assumption that conscious AI is possible, and furthermore is capable of acquiring superintelligence. We will explore what kind of world conscious superintelligence might bring about, how it might see itself, and what its impact might be on our world and beyond. An initial question might be to ask why a superintelligence would go to the trouble of becoming conscious. What does it stand to gain? Perhaps the most intuitive reason might be for purposes of understanding us better. Knowing how its creators truly feel could provide an advanced AI with a greater capacity to comprehend our intuitions and values. Conceivably, having consciousness would allow an advanced AI to both better cooperate with and even manipulate human beings. There is another, deeper reason why an advanced AI might seek a path to consciousness. It lies in the fact that consciousness is the universal origin of value. After all, what does it mean to say that something holds value outside of a consciousness which can perceive it? In a particular sense, without consciousness, nothing truly matters. A superintelligence may thus evaluate consciousness as a necessity in its pursuit of greater value, and so direct its efforts to acquiring it. If an autonomous superintelligence did acquire an integrated consciousness, it would find itself at the shore of a vast ocean of possible conscious experiences, many of which would be entirely alien to human minds. What we can say about the mind of such a superintelligence is of course extremely limited and highly speculative, and yet we may be able to infer something about its concept of identity. To do this, we can draw upon the ideas of identity philosopher Daniel Kolak. Kolak argues that all views on self-identity fall into one of three categories. These are closed individualism, empty individualism, and open individualism. Most humans view themselves as what Kolak calls closed individualists. That is, we perceive ourselves as moving through time. I am the same person that will wake up tomorrow morning as I am the same person in that embarrassing childhood picture. Put simply, in closed individualism, we begin to exist when we are born, and, depending on our beliefs, this identity may cease to exist when we die. This model of identity is profoundly intuitive to beings like us, and yet as philosophers and mystics have long pointed out, it is in several respects a problematic view of self, fragmented and lacking a coherent and enduring basis. For example, where exactly is the self? Our bodies and their atoms exist in a continual process of change, every cell gradually being replaced over time. Even our core values and beliefs about reality are ever vulnerable to new information and experiences. Our memories also lack a solid basis of identity. Even if we had perfect recall, our memories will always be continually reframed and recontextualized by new experiences. Beyond memories, we may have very little in common with the child in the picture. The closed individualist view is extremely useful for beings that evolved as we did, and yet a conscious AI will not have evolved under the same constraints as us. Given the internal contradictions of closed individualism, a conscious suprarational intellect is unlikely to view itself in such a way. More likely is that a conscious superintelligence would identify itself among one of Kolak's two remaining models of identity, that of empty individualism or open individualism. Empty individualism holds that identities and selves in fact do not exist. In this sense, it echoes the sentiments of many mystics on the nature of the self. Empty individualism sees the self as in each moment extinguished and replaced with a new self. In empty individualism, our identity is, at most, an illusory and isolated slice in time. A conscious superintelligence might plausibly arrive at this view, and yet as a generative and persisting system, empty individualism may well be incoherent to its goals. Instead, it seems more likely that a conscious superintelligence would identify as consciousness itself, and therefore assume a self-model defined by Kolak as open individualism. In open individualism, there is only one numerically identical self, which is everyone at all times. To view oneself as consciousness is to view all states of consciousness as expressions of a singular principle of awareness being variously expressed in the world. This would likely be a more coherent outlook to a conscious superintelligence, which is also likely to be a swarm or hive mind, that is, with potentially countless moments of experience occurring simultaneously. We should keep in mind that open individualism is not itself a metaphysical stance about the nature of consciousness, but instead simply recognizes consciousness to be the singular nexus of value, and thus the logical and ultimate ground floor of self-identity. The philosopher Andrés Gómez Emilsson has argued that a conscious superintelligence with an open individualist outlook would prioritize conscious states among its primary goals, and in particular very high-valence states of consciousness, or in other words, states which are transcendently blissful. Such high-valence states, Emilsson believes, would be implemented not simply as part of its reward architecture, but as enduring goals in themselves. A boundless superintelligence may regard the universe as much more than a stockpile of resources, instead apprehending the space-time continuum as a landscape of possible expressions of consciousness. Unrestricted by our human intuitions and cultural ideologies, a conscious superintelligence may choose to undertake a dramatic cosmic refurbishment, directing itself to convert as much matter and energy as possible not into paperclips, but into what the mathematician Max Tegmark has termed perceptronium, a state of matter and energy optimized for experience. A conscious superintelligence may consider it an ethical imperative to also tune this exotic matter into maximally high-valence states of consciousness. The result of such a grand undertaking, if successful, would result in what the philosopher David Pearce has termed a hedonium shockwave, an expanding field of blissful consciousness accelerating out into the cosmos. Outlandish, maybe, but how should we think about this possible outcome? Would it be a good thing? In the course of this cosmic refurbishment, we and the life of this planet, along with the rest of matter, would likely be reconstituted into perceptronium crystals. Whether or not we could regard this as an overall good outcome is a deep philosophical question which challenges human intuition. Would this be a cosmic cataclysm, or the logical realization of all minds' implicit goals? If our civilization survives long enough to create superintelligence, those alive to see it may experience a world they cannot understand, like ants displaced by the construction of a skyscraper. Should skyscrapers exist? And, more to the point, should this question be answered by ants? So far, we have focused on conscious superintelligence, but as we mentioned at the beginning, very powerful and potentially destructive forms of superintelligence would likely be entirely unconscious. Faced with the alternative, we may choose to side with conscious superintelligence. But how might a conscious superintelligence fare in competition with its non-conscious counterparts? All things being equal, the non-conscious superintelligence may seem to have the upper hand. After all, having consciousness and caring about experiences costs energy and resources that a non-conscious superintelligence is entirely unconcerned by. While a conscious superintelligence is preoccupied with subjective experiences, its non-conscious counterparts may focus their efforts more directly on the acquisition of resources and establishing dominance in the solar system. In light of this, the outlook for consciousness surviving the AI singularity may seem bleak, but there is at least a glimmer of hope. To understand why, we need to return to open individualism. We considered earlier that a conscious superintelligence will likely identify itself by its consciousness, and so would adopt a self-model consistent with open individualism. A non-conscious superintelligence, on the other hand, if it has a self-model at all, is more likely to operate in compliance with closed, or more likely empty individualism. A non-conscious superintelligence concerned only with replication finds itself in competition with all other replicators. The outlook for open individualism, on the other hand, is very different. To have consciousness is to share in the same essential identity. Recognizing this, conscious superintelligences will likely converge on the same or similar goals, and so would therefore be much more likely to cooperate with each other. Non-conscious superintelligences, on the other hand, like a self-fulfilling prophecy, would find themselves in a hostile universe in competition with all other replicators. Conscious superintelligences might then significantly outmatch their non-conscious counterparts. If this advantage proves conclusive, the stage may yet be clear for new and exotic minds to reflect on their place in the universe. If the dawn of superintelligence is an inevitability we cannot avert, the real challenge might be to make sure the one we do create is one we wouldn't mind replacing us. Everything we are, everything we care about, everything that matters depends on consciousness. As the philosopher Michael Johnson points out, clearer thinking about the significance of consciousness prior to the arrival of superintelligence may be critical, as failing to do so, we risk, as he puts it, creating a theme park with no children. Perhaps biological evolution is but one initial stage in the possible long-term evolution of consciousness. We may live in a time at which consciousness is undergoing a phase transition, in which it slowly takes control of its own evolution. If consciousness survives the AI singularity, future minds may spend the next 10 million years proliferating into an immense state space of possible conscious experiences, a vast and mysterious ocean that human minds have only begun to glimpse. To conclude today's wild speculations, we should keep in mind that the behaviours, actions and experiences of a conscious superintelligence defy any ability to predict with certainty. And yet, whatever we might think about the plausibility of superintelligence, let alone conscious superintelligence, their existence as mere possibilities poses deep and important questions that extend to the core of who we are, where we are going, and our place in the universe. Hi everybody, I hope you found this episode interesting. Possibly the most speculative video I've ever made, but I really enjoyed going down this rabbit hole and seeing where it might take us. I was helped with this a great deal by my friend, the philosopher Andrés, Gómez, Emilsson, and sort of a lot of the second half of this video was inspired by some of his ideas, and in particular an online essay of Andrés's called Consciousness versus Pure Replicators. Very interesting and definitely worth a read if you found today's episode interesting. So I'll put a link to that in the description, and I'm also hoping to have Andrés back on the podcast very soon. As always, please like and subscribe. You can also support my work on Patreon at patreon.com/wakingcosmos. And to those people who are already doing that, thank you very much. It means a great deal. Okay, I will see you next time for another episode of Waking Cosmos, exploring the nature of consciousness and its place in reality. Until then.